Hello, David Clarke here from DVC Training, and today I'm going to look at what does it mean when you keep getting this screen popping up on your computer. Well, it means you've got a Windows 10 machine and Microsoft are going to stop providing support for it in October this year. What does that mean? Well, they do say that having regular Windows updates is the best way to keep your computer safe from being hacked by other people. So if it stops getting updates, it's more likely to get hacked. Because what happens is somebody finds a problem, a way you can get into Windows through a backdoor, they publish it, and then all the hackers start sending out little robots all over the internet to try and find computers connected to the internet that haven't been patched for this problem, and then they can mess your computer up. If you remember a few years ago, there was a major thing in the UK where the NHS was practically put out of business for a while because a lot of their computers hadn't been updated, so they were hacked and then they couldn't use them until it was all fixed. So you really want to make sure that you're getting Windows updates. You also want to have some antivirus going. Now, I do tend to just use the built-in Windows antivirus myself these days because it's pretty good. But getting updates is important. So you stop getting updates, you've got a problem, because if you're on the internet, your computer might get hacked in some way. So the big question is, well, what can you do about it? You can go up to Windows 11 for nothing. It's free if you've got Windows 10, but the problem is Microsoft insists that you have certain types of hardware inside your computer, and if your machine's fairly old, you might not have it. So, for example, I'm doing this on a system which is a laptop. I've had it for some time, and it's a 7th generation processor. Now, 7th generation, it means it's quite old. If I just look it up, the 7th generation came out in 2017. So it's something that's about 8 years old. Every year Intel bring out a new generation. The number at the front there, so the 7 on my processor, that number tells me what generation it is. If it's got a 7, it's a 7th generation, 8th generation. They went all the way up to 14th generation, and then at the end of last year, they changed it and produced what they called ultra core chips. So obviously we're kind of 7 generations on from that, because my thing came out in 2017, 8 years ago. On the other hand, it still works. If it still works, why should I shell out another £1,000, £1,500 for a new one? Right now, the problem is, it's got Windows 10, it won't take Windows 11. That processor doesn't have what we call secure boot and a TMP 2.0 module, which is some kind of security thing. Doesn't really matter what it is, the fact is Windows 11 won't install on this computer. Now, I have got a 9th generation, and I can put it on that, and anything 9th generation onwards I can definitely use. I can find out whether my machine will take Windows 11 by going to Windows Update, and here it says get ready for Windows 11, and I can choose this thing, check hardware requirements, and the simplest thing is to actually come down here and use this PC Health Check app. So you click on that, download it. Once it's downloaded, install it. It's a matter of just double clicking on it and installing it. And once it's installed, I can just click on this, and it will say whether my machine supports Windows 10 or not. And it says this processor isn't supported. Now with my 9th generation system, it said this processor is supported, but you need to upgrade your BIOS. So with some of the old machines, it actually has the stuff in there, but it's not actually working in the right way for Windows 11. So if you update your BIOS, which is the most basic thing in the computer, which starts it off when you press the on button, then you might be able to run Windows 11 after all. And BIOS updates are free. You have to go to the website of the motherboard, download the latest BIOS, and then put it on. The downside about BIOSes is that if they go wrong in the update, it can fry your motherboard. Now, it doesn't happen very often, but it can happen. And, there's more of a possibility of it happening if you don't really know what you're doing. So if you say you've got a 9th generation machine and it's not letting you put Windows 11 on, either you can upgrade the BIOS yourself or send it to somebody else and they'll do it for you and then put Windows 11 on for you. I can do this, for example. If you're in the UK, you can send it to me and I can update the BIOS. I did try to do it once by remote control with somebody because it is something that you can actually do fairly easily when you know what you're doing. But unfortunately, when it updated the BIOS, it then stopped his computer going into Windows because it changed a couple of basic settings in the BIOS and his machine needed that to get it started off. So he had to send the machine to me anyway. So I do say these days it's not really worth getting me to try and do a BIOS update remotely with you. It's really something that I have to physically have, and obviously that means you've got to get a machine to me, and obviously I charge for the time of doing it and so on. But it's cheaper than buying lots of new hardware. Because with this laptop, what can I do? Okay, so it can't support Windows 11 at all. after October, it's going to be dodgy keeping this onto the internet. What am I going to do with it? It's working. I could say, curse you, Microsoft. I've got a perfectly working computer here and you're going to stop me using it. Which is one way of thinking about it. I mean, if you're being charitable, Microsoft have to pay people to keep producing these updates, and I'm not paying them any money to do that. So yeah, at some point they're going to have to say, tough, you've had it for 7 years, it's time for you to do something about it. We're not going to keep doing this for you for nothing. So I kind of understand it, but it's still annoying. So what can I do about this computer? Well, the first thing is, if I never put this computer on the internet, it's not a problem. The security updates protect you from getting hacked, but it can't get hacked if somebody can't get to your computer. So it's not on the internet, they can't get to it, they can't hack it, your machine will just carry on working until some piece of hardware dies. So the simple thing, don't stick it on the internet. Now, it isn't as simple as that these days, of course, because we've all got programs that have to go on the internet every so often to keep the license going. First one of these I ever had was a thing called TMPEG, which complained loudly if you didn't go on the internet once a month. But Premiere, Edius, pretty much everything these days. Topaz is another one that I use all the time. All these programs want to go on the internet every so often to keep the license going. Some of them will actually stop working if you're not on the internet every single time. Now, with something like Edius, if I've just got one program like Edius, I could just go on the internet once a month for 5 minutes, open up Edius, close it down, and I'll be okay. If you're on the internet for 5 minutes and you haven't had regular updates, you're probably not going to get hacked in 5 minutes. You just got to remember to turn it off as soon as Edius works. If I've got 5 or 6 programs, they'll all want to be doing it at different times, or I've got to go through and turn it on and off every time I use one. That's going to get really annoying. But yeah, if it's just one program, don't bother to put it on the internet. If you want to do emails, do it on your phone, or do it on an iPad or something. But for your computer, just leave it off the internet. So that's one option. Another option is that Microsoft are going to let you pay for extra updates. Now, what I've been reading about this is that if you're a home customer, you can pay $30 and get support for a year. And if you're a business customer, then you can pay for 3 years worth of support. So I went to look it up, and on this page here, I found out that this extended support says here, yeah, it's so much for business users and so much for home users. A home user is somebody that uses Windows 10 Home. Now, all my computers are on Windows 10 Pro, even the ones that I just use for home use. I mean, most of my stuff is for home use, and I use a couple for this kind of stuff and for editing. So actually, this $30 a year doesn't apply to me or pretty much all of the people I've made computers for, because I always say get Windows 10 Pro, because that's the one all the editing programs are tested on. This is only for Windows Home customers. This Windows Home sting will only last for 1 year. So you can pay $30 and you'll get support from October 2025 to October 26. Then you'll be stuck in exactly the same situation you are now. The Windows Pro people says blah blah, it can be converted through this. Now I don't know if because I've got Windows Pro on one of my computers, so whether I can get this or not. But this will give me 3 years worth of support. So $61 per year, and I can get support for the next 3 years. This, by the way, is not something that you can not take up and leave it for a year and then think, oh, I've got hacked, I really need to do something about it. No, if you leave this for a year, you don't sign up in October 2025, you decide to sign up in October 2026, they'll charge you for the year that's gone as well as the 2 future years. So if you're going to do this, you've got to assume that you're going to pay out $180 for the next 3 years per computer. And I don't know if this will apply to me because I've got Windows Pro on my computers. I don't know if I can downgrade from Pro to Home and get this. I'm not going to bother. I've got several computers. It's going to cost me a fortune if I do it for every single computer. So I'm going to do something else. But that is what Microsoft are offering. Are they going to change their minds and not stop support of Windows 10 given that so many people haven't changed to Windows 11? Don't think so. I think what with all this stuff publishing and shouting about it so much, they're going to say tough. And for me, it's a pain in the neck. If I was somebody with hundreds of Windows 10 computers in an office, it's going to be a mega pain in the neck. It's also going to result in a lot more computers getting hacked because a lot of people won't do anything about it until it's too late. So anyway, what can I do? Well, I'm not going to pay for this. I can actually stick Windows 11 on this computer. Now, to install Windows, if you want to install Windows from scratch, it's fairly easy. You basically go off to the interweb, and I type in this Windows 11 ISO download, click on download Windows 11, and down here, you can come down and you can either get it to download it onto your machine right now, or you can download an ISO and burn that to a disk or a USB pen and use that to install Windows 10. If you do that, it will basically download, like I said, an ISO file. So if you ever made a DVD, it's exactly the same kind of thing that I would make out of Encore. And then you can use something like Rufus, which is a thing I use all the time, to make a bootable disk out of it. So I select the ISO, stick in a USB pen and press start. And once you do that, you get these two things popping up, which say remove the requirement for 4 gig of RAM and a secure boot and TMP, and remove requirement for an online Microsoft account. That's another thing, if you install Windows 11, it wants you to have a Microsoft account. Now, if you're not picking these things, you can actually get around that simply by installing the thing not plugged into the internet. But this will let you get around those two things. So I could stick Windows 11 on this laptop. My only thing is I am then putting Windows on here in not the proper way. So is somebody going to find a way to hack my computer because I've used this? I mean, I don't know. I don't know enough about what TMP2 does and so on. But truth is, I don't know. And I think Windows is so fundamental that I don't really want to do that, because I can't help thinking that maybe I'll get hacked anyway because I didn't do it properly. So for me, it's either do it properly, have a machine that can take Windows 11, or do something else, but don't use that Rufus thing. But it's there if you want to use it. So what's my other choices? Well, obviously, next choice, buy a new laptop, or if I'm on a desktop, buy a new desktop. With a laptop, you cannot basically upgrade the processor. So nothing I can do with this laptop to make it support Windows 11 apart from that Rufus thing. So I'd have to buy a new one. And a new laptop of the kind of a laptop that I like is going to cost me £1,000 to £2,000, depending on how powerful it is and how much RAM and so on. If I have a desktop, I can upgrade it. Now, if you're going to upgrade your computer, the biggest thing you're going to need is a new processor. So these are the kind of processors that are around at the moment. There's the 12th, 13th and 14th. They're all still hanging around. And then there's the new Ultra Core series. And there's i7s, i9s and i5s. So obviously, the more money you spend, the more powerful it is. Any of these will be way more powerful than the computer that you've got now. So obviously my 7th generation processor is not nearly as powerful as the 14th generation one that I have in my desktop machine, for example. But in a desktop, I could upgrade it by replacing the motherboard and the processor and probably the RAM. That's the most basic stuff. And then you'd have to buy a copy of Windows 11 to go with your new computer, because you can't transfer over the old Windows 10 to a new machine. But those are the four main basics: motherboard, processor, RAM, Windows. Now, when you're doing an upgrade on a machine that's 7 or 8 years old, I'd generally say probably a good idea to change the power supply as well, because if your old power supply blows and takes out the motherboard, that won't be guaranteed. So probably add in a power supply. And maybe while you're at it, upgrade the main Windows drive, because if your machine's 7 or 8 years old, you've probably got a small solid state Windows drive, and they're quite cheap these days. So if you change it, you'll have a nice bigger, faster Windows drive. You put those things together, and then if you were sending it to me, you'd have to add in the charge I would take for taking all that out, reinstalling it, setting it up and testing it. You'll be looking at somewhere in the region to £1,000 to £2,000 probably. You don't have to go for the absolute top processor. Like normally when I'm buying a new machine, I'd go and buy the latest Ultra Core 285 blah de blah, which is about £600 for just the processor. You don't have to do that. You could have instead save a bit of dosh and say go for the i7, which is almost £200 cheaper. You could even go for an i5. All of those will be better than what you've got. But obviously, when you're thinking about upgrading a machine, you get into lots of different ideas. So if you're interested in doing that through me, get in touch and we can talk about that and say what's the best thing to do. Your other question when you're upgrading is, what programs am I using? Are they going to work on my new fancy computer? I've used a lot of older programs that I've used happily on Windows 10 and Windows 11, and they've all worked okay. I can't promise you all your programs are going to work. Really, really old programs do sometimes ruin it, trash it completely. So in particular, I was having a problem installing Adobe Encore CS6. I would put that onto Windows 11 and it would kill Windows completely, and you couldn't get it back without getting rid of Encore. I did find a way around that one. So I can get Encore CS6 working on there, and I can get Premiere CS6 working on there. But you start going earlier and earlier, they may or may not work. In terms of things like Edius, obviously I've used Edius 9, Edius 10 and Edius 11 on there. I have put EDIUS 8 on there and it seemed to work. I didn't really thrash it, but that seemed to be okay. So a lot of my older programs are working. If you're using something like Resolve, of course, you'll just go to the latest one because all the updates are free, so why wouldn't you? Will your old hardware work? If you're using Blackmagic hardware, which most of my customers are, then I've still got an old Intensity Pro, not the Pro 4K, but an old Intensity Pro that I've probably had for about 10 years working, and yep, that was working for me on Windows 11. It still works with the current drivers, even if they say they're not officially supported. But the only thing I had that has been a bit dodgy is the USB 3 shuttles, which they did stop supporting anyway. But yeah, all my Blackmagic stuff's been working okay on Windows 11. And even for one person, I did set up an MX02, so a Matrox MX02, which the last official drivers for were for Windows 8. And I still actually got that up and running. Everything seemed to work fine on Windows 11 with that. So a lot of old stuff is working okay for me on Windows 11, but of course I can't promise it. And if you're using an old program like CS6 and something goes wrong on Windows 11, Adobe will politely say, pay for a new one, or maybe not too politely, but they'll say pay for a new one. Again, if I'm doing an upgrade for you and you've got something that you want me to try, I can try it out and see what happens. But yeah, that's the obvious thing. Upgrade the computer so you can have Windows 11. But it's going to cost you money. Say for my laptop, nothing I can do to upgrade this to have Windows 11. So it's either use it on Windows 10 and don't put it on the internet, or do something else. Another thing about these new processors here, these new Ultra 4 things have actually got a neural processor, or AI processors, built into them. So I do use some AI upscaling programs like Topaz, and they really use NVIDIA cards, and really everything has been programmed for most people to use an NVIDIA card. Now Intel have stuck some neural processors into the actual processor itself. But okay, for me, on my laptop, none of those are an option. So what can I do about it? The only other option I can think of is to go to a different operating system. So I thought about this and I tried out Linux. You may have heard of Linux, but you don't really know much about it. Linux is a free operating system that has been around for ages, and there are lots of different variations of it. You can see all these little things here, Red Hats and Kali Linux and all sorts of things. So you're thinking about installing Linux and you think, what out of all this lot, what do I actually use? Now, I haven't used all of them. I've been trying out a couple. I particularly wanted to say, okay, so I want to do some editing. How can I carry on using my laptop to do editing? Well, number one problem, most editing programs don't work on Linux. Premiere, Mac or Windows. EDIUS, Windows only. Vegas, Windows only. Resolve has got a Linux version as well as a Mac and a PC version. So I thought, right, I'll try doing that. Now I thought it would be as simple as just downloading this and installing it, but of course it isn't. For a start, Blackmagic say that they only officially support Rocky Linux and CentOS. I'd chosen Ubuntu, so what do? I tried installing it and it failed, and I thought, well, it's not going to work. I looked around on the internet, I found a few people saying, yeah, it doesn't work. And then, in the last couple of days, I did find a video on how to install it, which involved an awful lot of typing in the command line. And then I found another video where somebody had very kindly produced a script and a video about how to install it. So it was fairly painless if you follow what's in this video. I'll put the link in the description below and it's on screen right now. But this actually let it install on Ubuntu. To be honest, that's really as far as I've got it right now. It's installed. The free version has all sorts of problems in that, for example, it can't load up MP4 files or make MP4 files, so I'm going to be using the studio version. My first attempt at doing it, which was to edit a bit of this video, was it didn't quite work properly. But I really need to sit down and try using it, and if people are interested, and if I get anywhere, I might do another video all about my experiences of using Resolve on Ubuntu. The same person also made up a video on how to use another version of Linux called Linux Mint, which I have also installed. One of the reasons I tried Linux Mint is a lot of people suggested it was a good idea, so I thought, well, why not give it a go? I installed it and actually it's quite a lot like Windows in many ways, and it makes things easier, like being able to change your NVIDIA driver. Would you believe installing an NVIDIA driver on Rocky Linux proved to be a bit of a struggle in working out how to do it, whereas Linux Mint has a nice little update your drivers dialog and does it for you. And again, this same guy produced a script to get it installed on Mint, so I have also tried that. And again, I might let you know how it goes in a future video. But you can already see it's not as simple as using Windows. and I did have to do some command lining. You might not want to get into that yourself. And there's going to be frequent updates to resolve, so I will have to do this thing using this guy's script every time there's an update to get the update installed. It's not as simple as just running it on Windows. Now there are other programs. There's a couple of freebies, which I have installed but haven't really tried. The two I've used are KD Live and Shotcut. Now again, I haven't really tried to use them because they're different to what I'm used to, and I've only got so many hours a day. And although I am pretty good at learning programs, it's another thing to learn. And to be perfectly honest, I have got Windows 11 computers and they still work. They use EDIUS 11, which I'm quite happy with. They use DaVinci Resolve, so I probably will be using those still for the bulk of my work. So I don't really want to learn another program. They look fairly capable, but I can't tell you how good they are. The other one I am looking at is Lightworks. Now, Lightworks is a program that has been around for donkey's years, and it has been used to edit feature films. There's a free version and there's a couple of paid versions. Again, looks extremely capable and looks very good at doing all sorts of different bits of video. And it's another thing to learn, but that's probably the one I'm going to concentrate on. And I did try installing that on my Ubuntu machine, and it installed and opened, which is a good start. Of course, the next thing I had to do is to try and get it to talk to my Windows drives, because I've got a dual boot machine, so I've got the main drive now boots between Windows and Ubuntu, but the actual video drives are still set up in NTFS for Windows, and although I can see them, for some reason Resolve isn't. And I think I've got around that, but again I might just save that for another video. As you can see, not straightforward. Now, ignoring the video side, I actually really like using Linux for regular stuff. It feels a bit nippier than Windows, and I just like the idea that I'm not beholden to Microsoft or Google or anybody else. It's just for the stuff I specifically want to use, which is video editing. I haven't quite got there yet, and I honestly don't think I will. People like Grass Valley and Adobe, they're not going to write a Linux version. Adobe have done a Mac version and a PC one. They're never going to do a Linux one. They've got no interest in doing it. Unless this whole Microsoft forcing you to get a Windows 11 thing really, really annoys huge amounts of people, nobody is going to, unfortunately, support Linux in huge amounts. And it's not just the editing programs. I also use Affinity Photo. There isn't a Linux version of that. There are some Linux image manipulation programs. I really like Affinity Photo. I'm going to carry on using it. Topaz Video, which is one of the things I use for upscaling, using AI to upscale stuff, which I do use for a lot of old stuff, and I happen to be editing a lot of old videos at the moment. That is Windows or Mac. And there isn't going to be a Linux version, I seriously doubt. So again, can't use that. I've really got to keep Windows going. Of course, I'm okay, because I have got a Windows 11 PC. I'm really mentioning Linux here as this is a way for you to keep your old machines going and secure. And I think for just regular stuff, brilliant. Not so sure for video editing. So why don't we have a quick look at Linux itself. Here I am using Ubuntu. I looked around at all these variations and I chose Ubuntu. A lot of people said Ubuntu, oh, that's a good version of Linux. Do that. I took it, I installed it, stuck it on a machine, worked really nicely. It was fairly easy. I followed the instructions for installing it by downloading an ISO, making a USB pen. I mean, a really nice thing about Linux is you can make a USB pen and boot off the USB pen and see what it's like before you do anything to your computer. But sticking Ubuntu on there, it even did things like when I put it on for my computer that already had Windows 10, it stuck in a menu, so I can now choose to go into Linux or I can choose to go into Windows on my laptop. It was actually fairly simple, fairly painless, and choosing Ubuntu, it actually installed lots of other bits and pieces as well. And then I could go into it and I could find how to install things like VLC for playing back video clips and so on. So I thought that worked really well. So you can see you've got a menu down the bottom. There are ways of making these icons bigger and shorter. I mean, for a start, this started over here on the side, so I had to go to the settings, which I did by clicking on this little stuff at the top here and going to the cog. And then I could go into Ubuntu desktop and say where new icons are going to start. So if I'm putting new icons on the desktop, where they are, where the dock is. So I could have the dock starts over here and about that size. I made it a bit smaller and I stuck it at the bottom. So it's a bit more like Windows. I did find that once I was using this, then I went back to Windows, and then I came back to this, I was looking for a thing. I said, I know I put a program on there, but where on earth is it? There's this little icon over in the corner here. You pop up that and it brings up all your apps. And these are different apps that I've installed. The sort of apps you can install, to do those, you go to the App Center, and then you look through them for all the ones that you've actually got. Now, there are others that you can install, but just because something says it works for Linux doesn't mean it's actually going to work. I have found out that. But there are the obvious things like Chromium that I mentioned, which is a version of Chrome effectively, which I have got installed. Firefox. I mean, because of the way I installed it, I had a lot of useful stuff was installed by default. I didn't have to go through here. And I went down to the categories here, photo and video, and that's where I came across VLC, Shotcut, which is a video editor, and there's another video editor on here which is NDLive. So to install something like that, you just click on it and then you download it and install it. It's a bit like using a phone. There is a reason this is a bit like using a phone, and that's because a lot of modern operating systems like Android were kind of based on Linux in the first place. I know the Mac operating system was as well, so if you're used to using a Mac, some of this might even look familiar. You know, this is the free editing program, which actually there is a version for Windows, there's a version for Linux, there's a version for Mac. But again, haven't really got into using that very much. Thunderbird was already installed on Ubuntu. It isn't installed on some other versions. Firefox was already installed. So very simple, I can just go onto the interweb. And I can do things like I can go to my Google account and sign in. And then I will get access to all my Google stuff, my Google Photos, everything else like that. I did get Google Remote Desktop going. And you might say to yourself, why, David? Why do you use Google Remote Desktop? Well, I have another laptop, which is less powered and a bit older than the one that I'm actually filming this on. And that, even under Windows, can't run Resolve properly. But by using Google Remote Desktop on the computer, initially using Windows, I can actually remote control another computer in the house. So I can sit on this laptop, but actually edit on a desktop machine with a much better graphics card, more RAM and so on. And it's almost like editing on that machine. And I managed to get that installed and working on Linux. So now I can run my old laptop quite happily on Linux, but control my desktop in another room using a decent editing program. I use Google Remote Desktop because it's free and it still works from Linux. There are other ways of remote controlling systems, which I haven't tried out from Linux to Windows, but I can remote control it effectively. I am now working on my Windows 11 PC on another laptop, which is happily protected from everything on the internet because it's using an up-to-date version of Linux, which will carry on being supported until 2029 or something. So I have done that. It does require you having another computer that can run Windows 11, but I have done that. And for everything else, for my emails, it uses Thunderbird, which I use all the time on a PC. You've got YouTube, you've got playing media files. All the other stuff that I use works quite happily on that laptop on Ubuntu. The only thing I can't do is edit videos, upscale videos. Even there's a program I use called Blender to do lots of fancy 3D stuff for my Doctor Who thing that I've been doing. Blender works on Linux. Free program. I find a lot of free programs work on Linux. The sort of people that write free programs support Linux. The sort of people that do paid programs don't. And Blender, which is a very, very good free 3D program, works quite happily on Linux. I just wish I could have more editing programs. By the way, one downside I found of the remote control software, which I haven't found a solution for, is there's always a lip sync problem.
I'll hand my compatriot, you varlets! My computers are set to disperse your...
The picture is fine, it's just the sound never quite in sync. And there may be some other remote control options down there which will get around this. At the moment it's something that I live with, and when I want to do any sound stuff, I'll go and actually use my desktop computer. But yeah, that's my other option. Use a different operating system. For a lot of my customers, when you've only got one PC, if you have to have it on the internet, your best option is to upgrade, I'm afraid, is to take that computer and make it a decent up-to-date machine. So if you're interested in doing that, get in touch and I'll be able to tell you how much it's going to be, and then you'll have to send it back to me for a week or two and I'll do it for you. I mean, in the process, you will get a much better computer. Any computer like this laptop, which is 7 years old, it might die any minute. It's old, so something might go wrong with it. Already one of the ports on the back, one of the display ports on the back doesn't work. Other bits might go wrong. My even older laptop, some of the buttons on the keyboard don't work properly. I can't do anything about that. You can't fix this machine anymore. You know, things wear out. That's going to happen anyway. I just want to try and get a bit of life out of them while I can. But those are the options as I can see it. So it's basically, don't stick it on the internet, upgrade it. If you want to do word processing, emails, watching the internet, anything internet based, use Linux. If you want to do a bit of editing, it's not an answer. Anyway, hope that helps. If you've got any questions, obviously get in touch, david@dvctraining.co.uk. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and go to my website, www.dvctraining.co.uk for more information. And I'll see you next time.